Well, let me get us started and welcome everybody. Um, I'm glad many of you have decided to find time to come back and give up another Saturday morning. We had a good time last, was it 2 weeks ago, and we're looking forward to a really interesting evening, or sorry, for me it's evening, morning for all of you. And really just want to thank Bia and Bill again for giving us their time to share some of their thinking with us on curriculum design and the follow, tinker, make, share. I think we're going to be more hands-on tonight, and welcome again. And I need to remember. Oh, you've got it recording too, Bill. That's good. Okay, good. You've made me obsolete.
not in any way.
Over to you. Welcome everybody, and enjoy the next hour and so. Thank you.
All right, Ed, I'm going to ask you to make Bill also a
B also.
Well, B, a co-host, so he can continue to let people in who are in the waiting room. Can you see the waiting room?
I don't know.
So, okay. I cannot make you a co-host, but I think Ed can, and then you can admit people from the waiting room.
All right.
You should be make co-host. Okay.
Ah, there we go. Yes, I'm admitting now.
So I will start ignoring the admit.
Yeah, you ignore that. Your job. You just managed that. Hello, everyone.
Hello. So welcome back to part 2. Today we're going to go into more practical aspects of project-based learning. If you were not here last time, it is okay. You can watch the recording later, or maybe you've watched it already, but there is nothing that we're going to talk about today that you will not get if you were not here last time. So don't leave, don't worry. Welcome, everybody is welcome.
And there's a recording of last time,
right? That's
which, yeah, okay, you said that. I was
so you can watch the recording, or you can just follow along and get whatever you get. You're gonna get some stuff. It's gonna be good.
we hope.
Okay, so now I see what you're talking about.
All right, you want to just do this? Look at this.
Ah, got it.
Look at you.
So, go ahead.
After you.
Go ahead. No.
We're going to spend a lot of today answering this question, answering the why question, and thinking about why we would build these kinds of structures the way we talked about last time, and why we need to develop project-based learning in the way that we're going to describe.
And even if you were not going to use the method we talked about, why you should do projects beyond because somebody's telling you and it's the cool thing to do. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about planning for a project and assessing a project. So we're going to look actually at a sample project. Do you have the link?
Yes, I will get it for you in just a moment.
So we're going to look at a sample project, and it is very simple, and I would love for everybody to play along. You can do this even if you have never used Scratch. I'm going with Scratch because it's something I absolutely adore. So what we're going to do is, Bill is going to give you the link to this project. And
it is now in the chat.
What we're going to do is we're going to look at the code that I am providing you. And using the blocks that are available, if you know how to add blocks, you can add blocks, but you don't have to. The blocks are color-coded by action. If you've never used Scratch, it's very easy. You can't break it. And you can also play with the costumes and the sounds. Down here, you can tell the Scratch how big to be or how small to be, and you can give it specific locations to go. And this is where you actually click the green flag to get things going, and this is where you're going to see the action. So what we want you to do is actually go to the link that is in the chat and play around with what you see. And the challenge that I'm giving you right now is looking at the code. Can you figure out how to change it so that instead of having 3 cats, you have 4 cats that are evenly spaced on the screen?
So you've got 2 chunks of code there, and you shouldn't have to drag anything in to make this 4, but see if you can figure out, you can hit the little green flag to make it play, and then you can see what happens.
Can I go and show
Yeah,
you?
you'll need to share your screen.
I will,
You're not sharing right
yes,
now.
I'm going to.
just change your share. There you go.
This one?
Yep.
This one. So this is where you got to, and in order to see the code, just go inside by clicking, I'll go back and show you again. So click the see inside button, and once you're in here, you can run the code by clicking the green flag, and you can see that I have 3 cats and they're spinning very nicely, and they're multicolored cats. So by changing the numbers here in this chunk of code right here, see if you can figure out how to have 4 cats evenly spaced dancing on the screen. And when you do, say something in the chat. Let us know in the chat. Or if you have questions or if you do something different, let us know.
We've got some folks just joining. The link to this project, we're going to talk about it very quickly, is in the chat.
Yeah, if they joined after you put it in there, then it's not there.
I'm going to post it back in the chat.
It's,
Et voila.
it's a little problem with Zoom. If you join, you can't go back in the pre-existing chat.
Yeah, the before times chat. So we're seeing if we can make 4 evenly spaced cats instead of 3.
And I'm going to give you just 1 more minute. Set a timer for 1 minute.
Okay, 1.
So again, I'm putting the link to this Scratch project back in the chat for, hello, Jocelyn. So everyone hopefully will have access to this. Again, you click to see inside, and then you can play with the code and manipulate it.
So I'm going to go back to Keynote.
So did you guys figure it out?
And if you could make 4 cats, the minute is up. So if you made 4 cats, can you make 5 cats?
Someone tell us, what is your surmise about how to do this? Based on what you see in the code.
You can unmute yourself or you can just talk in the chat.
We're happy either way. I'm just wondering where you would look. It doesn't want to load on my web browser on my iPad. No, you don't need an app.
It should load.
On my iPad Pro, it's not loading in Google. Maybe I should use a desktop. I don't know.
Oh.
You're queen of Scratch. I don't know anything about this.
It should load on an iPad. It's HTML5. It used to be Flash, but they recoded the whole website, and that's when they translated it.
I don't know.
Would I need a VPN for China?
I'm not
We're uncertain about that.
I can try.
certain. But okay, so did anybody get, I will research that. I don't know how to, let me see if I can find something very quickly.
It loads, but you cannot access the code on the phone. Boy, this is going to be.
Oh, I don't know that you can.
I think on phones.
I am so sorry. We assumed everybody was going to be on a laptop, and okay, it doesn't matter. You don't have to do this. We're not going to quiz you on it later. What I wanted to do was demonstrate that I've made a very simple project that I could have made much more complex, but I left it very simple. And rather than tell you what to do and teaching you how to do absolutely everything, I guided you to explore on your own. And
so just back to our earlier questions, you've got the code now on your screen. Can you think of the original application rather, the code had 3 spinning cats. That's what this code is saying.
I'm gonna go back.
And you'll notice, no, don't go back to it.
To the code? Don't go back to the
No,
code?
just
Oh,
stay
just gonna show
where,
it.
just stay where you are.
Okay,
So it had 3 spinning cats, and you'll see that they're in the code. If you look at the code base, there's some information about that. You can't figure out the spacing. Sol got 5 cats, but not the spacing. So do you see anything? Go ahead.
I was able to get 4 cats. I'm not really sure how, quite frankly. I changed the 3 to a 4 and thought that would work, but then I got 3 of the 3 original cats. There were 3 duplicates on top of each other, and then I did something, and I'm not really sure, but now I have the 4th cat, but I still have the duplicates. So I really have lots of cats.
So part of it is, if you change the code while it's running, it will automatically add stuff on top. That's interesting, an interesting experience for young coders like yourselves. So if you hit the stop button up there by the flag and then run the flag again, then you'll see what the new code looks like without the old artifacts in it. So that's one interesting thing. And the second interesting thing is, so indeed, changing that 3 to a 4 or a 5 is changing the number of cats you have, because each time it runs through that code, it's putting down a cat.
It's creating a clone of the cat. So the important thing is, I gave you a project that's ready-made for you to explore, rather than saying, go make something, without helping you understand how Scratch works. If we had an hour, I could spend 5 hours just on this project, because it's my passion and I absolutely love Scratch. But the point was to show you guys that you can make a project very simple to help students play with what's there, tinkering a little bit at a time to understand how the blocks go together and how they fit together, before saying, now that you know this, go make your own design that is not a cat and make this into an artistic display. So this would be a starter project for an interactive art display.
So remember, last week we talked about this structure, and we're going to talk about it again this week. Follow, which is what this is. We gave you some original code, and we would typically actually have you go pick up these pieces and build it yourself, because we want the experience of you going in and picking out the pieces from the various bins there on the side and putting them together to match this. That's a follow phase. Then tinker is what we started to do here. And what you're doing is starting to think about, okay, well, let's see, I see a 3 there and there are 3 cats. If I change that 3 to a 4, does there get to be 4 cats? Well, yeah, except there's something else going on here, which is, you'll notice the cats are, that the thing is turning 120 degrees, and then it stamps another cat, and then it turns 120 degrees and stamps another one. So the way to change that to 5 cats is, we know 360 degrees makes a circle. So what's 360 divided by 4? What's 360 divided by 5? And then you get those evenly spaced cats. So this is, as B was saying, this is a skeleton for tinkering and starting to mess around with things so that you have this shared background.
And then you would issue other challenges. If you go to the project page on the project, then there are other projects. Can you make the cats have different colors? Can you have them in a different configuration so they're in a straight line rather than around the screen? So you can you make them spin faster, spin slower, spin in the opposite direction? And can you add sound effects? So there are lots of different ways to take this one very basic project and have students choose what they know or what they're interested in to tinker with and make something that they like out of what you've already given them, to help them understand how everything works together.
And these projects, these ways of tinkering that B has put up on the screen right now, they're not just random. And we'll talk about this here in just a second as we think about designing. Do you want people to do any of this stuff? Do you want them to play with some stuff? Some people, it's not loading, but.
No, it was just an example, and I wanted people to have the experience, but if they're having trouble, we should just, it's okay.
Well, so again, let's go back over what we were talking about for our, this follow, tinker, make, share, this framework that we were talking about last week and this week. Do you want to walk through this? You want to do this one?
Sure. So you start with following steps. So it's direct instruction, do this, do this, do this, do this. And you should not stop there, even though sometimes this is what we do in classrooms, because if you evaluate what students have done at the end of this, all you know is that students can follow directions, but you don't know if they're only doing what you've told them to do. You don't know if they've learned anything, or you don't know if they understood or misunderstood. All you know is they followed your instructions. So that's why we go on to tinker with some guided practice to let students understand how things are put together, how things work, and start to explore based on their interests.
And you're changing really existing features because it's a time for you as a learner to be starting mental models and going, I wonder why that works. And I wonder if that's, I have a hunch, I'm going to follow that hunch, but you don't have to build anything new yet. Once you've developed that, then you can start to then you can make your own individual projects.
Right. So this is where you issue a bigger challenge or have students propose what they want to do. And then based on what the students propose, they make something, and there should always be a sharing of the products so that the students can learn from each other, and so that the students are getting an authentic assessment by an audience that is not just focused on grades. So it's not always about the grades, but it's about being a part of a community of practice that works and learns together.
We talked about this last week, and we see in the sharing phase, this isn't just, kind of showing a few things or whatever. There's actually 3 different ways that we think about sharing. Comparison, here's mine, there's yours. What are the differences and similarities between these? It's about coordination and collaboration. Let's combine our projects to maybe address a bigger challenge. And it could also be about competition. So whose is the most fun, whose is the most interesting, whose uses resources best. There's a lot of different things you can do there. And the idea of this platform project that we introduced a couple of weeks ago is, again, we're going to start with a challenge, but the challenge is just to get us to a platform. And the platform is that project that Bea first introduced today. That's a platform. If you try something and it screws up, you can always go right back to exactly the way it was and try a new kind of thing. And the goal of all this, and the goal of this kind of tinkering on top of a platform, is to create diversity. So if you look at that list of challenges that are in the project and that Bea walked through a minute ago, some of those things are about coding, some of those things are about audio, some of those things are about visuals. You're trying to create a diverse community so that people have different expertise and they can help one another. This is about undergirding.
And they can learn from one another.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's really about helping support the teachers with more stuff. Lisa, you've had your hand raised, but are you still raising your hand, or was that from earlier? You can unmute yourself and just, oh, okay, I don't know.
It was from earlier, sorry.
Okay, no worries. I didn't want to miss that. So the whole function of the tinker phase is just for people to try things out and play and experiment in a non-destructive way, so that if something horrible goes on, then you can go back to it.
Even if you fail, it's not catastrophic.
It's not catastrophic. So it's different from how we usually do classes, where that first thing, if you don't get it, that's your only shot. And when we think about the way assignments typically get built, we typically have decided a lot of things about what's supposed to happen. So I was an English teacher for a long time. So we're going to write an 8-page paper.
Lisa has her hand up.
Is that a new hand, or is that the old
Yes.
hand? We don't know. We can't know. Okay. Anyway, I've decided, how long the paper should be. I've decided how many resources you should have and of what sorts. I've decided sometimes the topic or the form of the thing. I've made all the crucial decisions already, and I've made this little box. And the student's job is just to kind of fill up that box. And in fact, all the students are supposed to fill up those boxes in the same way because it's the same assignment for everyone. And the idea is that when everything's done, every project should look pretty much the same. And then what we assess is, okay, person C there didn't quite get all the way, and so they get a lower grade, and the other two, they get a higher grade, and that's it. But I can't really know if they know when it's appropriate to make those choices that I made for them. And because all the decisions have been made already, I can't really know what they know or what they've learned. So part of what we want to talk about today and thinking about these projects is if you're making boxes for learners to fill, the only thing you can assess is how well they follow directions. You don't know what they know, you don't know what they think, you don't know what they can really do, because the box shapes everything.
So instead, the idea is to go with constructionist learning, in which your job as a teacher is to build just the platform. You build the floor and the students build everything else around it. And you build the floor low enough that everybody can get to the floor. And then you have wide walls so everybody can come in and bring in their own preferences and their own abilities. And you have to have high ceilings with high expectations so that even if you're using a very simple tool like Scratch, for example, which the original audience for Scratch was 7-year-olds, you can take something that is very easy and very accessible and make something very complex with it, whatever it is, whether you're writing a paper or making a video or presenting a skit to the class, whatever it is, you have to build a platform that is easy for everybody to get to, but allows for lots of learning.
Lots of diversity.
That gets very complex depending on the student's abilities.
Because now you can tell some things about the students and what they really know. You can tell how they've applied this to a situation. You can see the different kinds of ways that they're synthesizing this and understanding it in their own context. You can, now I can really understand what it is that they've learned and know. And last week we talked about the importance, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the importance of collisions, that people have these preconceptions about the way the world works. And if they don't collide with something, they often won't actually learn. It'll pass through their heads. Maybe they can put it on for a test, but they won't actually change who they are or change their thinking moving forward.
Go ahead.
Oh, this is me?
Yeah.
It's hard to know. We've been, doing these things in various ways. So when we design projects, part of what we want to think about is prioritizing learner choice over just compliance. So rather than just giving a recipe and everyone's dish looks the same at the end, I want the learners to make some of those choices that traditionally we've made as teachers, because that way I can see what they're really understanding and what they're really wrestling with. And we can also see the diversity of that thought, which gives us a richer kind of learning experience for the class and gives us more opportunities for other students to support what's going on.
So you also pose challenges rather than emphasizing the tools or the recipes or the artifacts, meaning you want to know not just about the end product, but about the process for getting to that end product. You want to know how the students are making choices and how the students are arriving at conclusions rather than just seeing those conclusions in isolation.
And that means that the artifact, the thing that they make, is not actually the goal. It embodies the goal, it carries with the goal, but the goal has to grow organically from it. So, I can't have people code, scratch the cat and say, well, I'm thinking about climate change. Like, those don't really fit together. But if I can think about an artifact that brings those goals in, that helps me understand that process, then that's really what we're focusing on.
And learning is personal, social, nonlinear, ongoing, and iterative, meaning everybody has a different way of getting at what they're trying to learn, and they're going to express it differently. And this is when you ask just multiple choice questions, they're recognizing what they're seeing, but you're not hearing what they're really understanding. And it's important to let the learning be social, because then students learn from one another, and they also see that when they're working in isolation, they might feel like they're struggling with something and everybody else has it easy. But when the learning is social, they can work on things together and understand that it is hard for everyone and they all need to work on it together, and they're all going through the same things. So they're more motivated to work on stuff and get to the goals. It makes everything more meaningful because they understand that everybody has something to contribute.
Yeah.
So when we talk about learning, and especially in project-based learning, the things that the students learn, you start with what you have to teach, whatever you've been hired to teach. You're teaching math or science or social studies or languages or art or music, whatever it is you're teaching, that's what you have to teach. That's what you're most expert at. And so that's the domain that you're teaching. But you also want to give students experiences, because you don't want them just to know what they're being taught in school in a textbook. You want them to have the experience of learning that in a meaningful context and with other people, so they know what the point of learning it might be.
If they only know how to do what it is in your classroom, well, I learned how to do this particular mathematical approach and I know how to do it in the classroom, but I have no way of understanding how to carry that into the experience of my everyday life because I've never done anything with it in my everyday life, then you haven't really taught them that mathematical concept.
And then finally, you want them to develop skills that they only acquire through experiencing something. So for example, you might talk about in a math class about percentages, but what's the importance of percentages? Well, you want them to go through the experience of calculating the payment on a credit card bill. And then when they have a credit card bill, they'll know how to calculate it because they've had that experience in the class. It's not automatic that what students see in a textbook or in a classroom lecture automatically translates to something that happens outside of the classroom. So having students connect the dots between the content that they're learning and why they need to learn it in a real context, then actually gives them the skills. And you do that through projects.
The key here is that the domain is dominant in certain ways. Maybe it should be a really big circle, but there are experiences that help illustrate that domain. And there are skills that you have to use in those experiences with tools, for example, that apply to that domain. There are skills that you bring in, and those all connect together so that if students understand information and concepts about the domain, if they're familiar with experiences, and they feel comfortable in these new experiences, and if they bring skills that they can into those experiences, then they've got this whole package.
So when you plan a project, you answer the question, why are we doing this project? And it brings together the domain, the skills, and the experiences. So in the domain, you have your content goals, and all of these are set by the teachers because the teacher is the expert and the guide that's going to walk the students through the experience of completing a project. So when you set the content goals for a project, it should never be just find information and give it to me exactly as you found it. Even if it's transformed, for example, you have the students find information and then give it to you via video or audio or in pictures. If they are just giving you the same information, but they're not discovering something new or contextualizing it or synthesizing it to solve a problem or to convey an idea that wasn't originally there, then all they're doing is just regurgitating what they found.
It's cut and paste.
It's cut and paste. And that's, for example, I work with teachers a lot who say, how do you keep students from plagiarizing? Well, you have to plan the project in a way that what you're asking them to do does not lend itself to plagiarism. It's not just going to find the answer and giving you an answer, a straight answer. There has to be some working with whatever you give them so that they have to engage with the content and think about it and go through the experience of doing this, applying the content, or having to question what they thought and explain it in a different way. How does it connect to real life? How does it connect to inside the classroom? So whatever you're asking them to do, the experience has to be connected to the content in a way that they're using the content, not just reporting the content. And through the experience, then they develop skills goals. For example, if you're talking about, some of them might be domain specific, like how to use a graphing calculator, or
how to use video editing software,
yeah, but those things might not be part of your domain goals anyways, but they're part of an experience that the students are richer for having them. For example, how to work on a team and resolve conflicts, and communicate and give each other feedback so that the teamwork is harmonious, or how to do research, how to speak in public. So all these things are experiences that you only acquire the skills by going through the experience of having to use this skill.
So what we're really thinking about here is gathering information about the content, about the domain, bringing it into an experience to apply it, to develop fluency and familiarity with similar kinds of situations so that when I get out of the classroom, I can do that. And so that you collide with those misunderstandings that we talked about 2 weeks ago, so that they have to solve problems, because that way they're actually committing that information to their own abilities and developing, therefore, these skills, some of which are very much about the domain, chemistry or English or French or Chinese, or, you know, there are all these kinds of things that you might do, or this particular kind of art. There are domain specific skills, but they're developing adeptness with tools specific to that particular domain. But they're also, as B said, these bigger skills like problem solving and teamwork and collaboration and things like that, that they can transfer to other areas.
So the goals are not just a goal for the goal itself, but it's something to think through. So for example, if the goal is to make a mini documentary about World War I, you're thinking through the documentary to really understand World War I and whatever specific topic is selected about the event, but also the experience of making a documentary, working with video, working with images and audio, working with other people in a collaborative setting, and presenting it to an audience.
Yeah, so that the artifact itself is not the goal. The artifact is simply a crystallization of the thinking, struggle, and work that led to the creation of that artifact. It's what Papert calls an object to think with. So you're thinking with this thing and thinking through this thing in order to develop mastery in the domain. And the key here is, if you just tell people what it is, they don't really understand or appreciate its value. So what Papert said critically was that when we teach something, we deprive a child of the pleasure and benefit of its discovery. And I would add to that we deprive them of their ability to apply it in new situations as well. They only know really how to apply it in the way that we've given them.
So in addition to having the goals that are set by the teacher, there are always learner expectations that should be set by the learners themselves. So in conversation with the students, what is the community, what are we as a community accepting as good work?
In each of these same 3 spheres.
So when you launch a project with students, you communicate the goals. I would like for us to learn about these things, and the kind of product I'm thinking of is this kind of product. And I'm going to go with the mini documentary because it's an easy example to talk about. So the students are going to make a mini documentary about whatever subject you have selected. And the conversation with the students is, they have watched the documentary. If they haven't, watch, you know, a little bit of a documentary. I always go to Ken Burns, my favorite. But then the conversation is, if you're making a video, what makes a good video? And students are very experts at telling you what a good video is. They can tell you what a good video and what a bad video is. So a talking head on a screen just droning on is not a good video. Something that has scratchy audio, or something that has bizarre transitions in the video, or that does not have an opening title, does not have lower third titles to identify who or what is on the screen. So all of these things are things that the students get to contribute and determine. We want a good video.
Because it gives you a bad experience.
Right.
The video they make is a bad experience. And
Having to watch
it might demonstrate poor skills, for example. So as you walk through this, you're going to say, okay, well, what kinds of things should we expect from people about the content? What kinds of things should we expect from people about the experience that they want to give to the audience? And maybe what kind of experience do they want to have while they're making this project?
Right. So
what do we expect from them?
in addition to the product and the content, you also talk about the experience. If you're working with others, how do you work with others? And you very explicitly write those goals. When we work with others, we're going to collaborate, we're going to compromise, we're going to manage our time, we're going to be kind to each other and polite. So all of these things can be specified in the goals, because what you're looking at is not just the process, but I mean, not just the product, but you're looking at the entire process, which is the experience of creating something for the classroom.
You know, we talk a lot with people who say, well, I tried project learning and just didn't work. And it's because the learning, the project itself exists on this foundation of both the goals that are set for it and the assessment. So that's really what we're talking about today. And part of the way to get to this project-based learning in a productive way is actually to let the students help set the expectations, so that they're not just creating the project, they're also creating the communal expectations for what the project should look like that will then be used in the assessment of how those projects have come out.
So
at the end.
you plan the project and the assessment side by side in collaboration with the students. And even though you're the expert and you know what the content should be, the students have an idea, because they're not empty boxes. They know if you say, you're going to explain to me this process, or you're going to tell me about this event, they know that they need to have introductory information that gets to something that then has some sort of conclusion. They know the process. And so setting the goals with the students will get buy-in from the students, and it will give you a point to reference when you yourself are giving feedback to the students.
And sometimes it requires some guidance. So for example, you might ask questions like, okay, is it okay for people to use sources without citing them? Well, most people don't really care. I don't care, whatever. But then you say, okay, is it okay for someone to take your stuff and use it as their stuff without citing it? Oh, well, I hadn't really thought about that. Maybe we should have some rules about that. Okay, so that guiding people through thinking through those questions is also giving them the ability to create their own frameworks when they get outside of your classroom.
And it gives the project a reason for being, and your expectations a reason for being your expectations. So for example, if you say, rather than having a conversation with the students, you arbitrarily say, when you're doing research on this, you have to have 5 sources minimum. And then students will go to 5 sources and stop very often. But if you say, how many sources should you have? I don't know. How many sources do you need to tell a complete story? So you're helping students develop these metacognitive processes of making decisions on their own, rather than just following instructions, following a recipe. How many pages should this paper be? I don't know. And when I work with students, I try very hard never to tell students, I want a minimum of 10 pages. Because when you say, okay, I want a minimum of 10 pages, they're going to fill the page and they're going to just go on and on to get to 10 pages. In fact, I find it is much more challenging when you tell students, you have to do this in a maximum of 2 pages, because they have to distill what they're learning. They have to think about what's really important. And in having to find what's really important, they're finding those collisions that they have to make those decisions. And so they have those collisions. Well, what's more important? What should I select? How do I condense this? How do I synthesize this so that I can explain it well in my own words in 2 pages?
Yeah.
So it's much harder to set a limit. It's much more of a challenge to set a limit than to demand a certain length. In talking to students and setting these goals together, the students figure out why things are the way they are. And it starts making the process of your assessment much more transparent, which builds a lot of trust. And I know people, at least here in the United States, there's a lot of talk about building trust with students. When things are opaque and mysterious, like the teacher gave me a grade, it doesn't help to build trust. When they understand why they're getting something, because they can see, and we're going to talk about that a little more in a moment. This is a first step to building trust with students, when they know why and how they're being assessed.
Well, and you know, part of this too is to say, okay, if you were the teacher who were doing this assessment, if we're assessing as a community, what is the experience of this? So, you know, someone asked about, okay, well, 2 pages, I'll just make my font, I'll do it in a 4-point font and have no margins. But the experience of that paper is not good. The experience of a project that drones on is not good. So what if the community is involved in that kind of assessment, then the community is also going to say, well, the experience of that is bad, and it didn't really demonstrate the skill that this other project did, and it didn't really help us understand the domain that we were trying to understand. So all those pieces fit together, and this is a great way, as you're developing the kind of rubrics and assessment tools for your students. If you think about each of these, if you think about developing expectations for the community in each of these areas, you'll have a really solid project.
So now we're going to get actually more detailed into assessing projects. Now that we've talked a lot about planning and having this conversation with students, out of these conversations, where you're going to distill everything that that happens, and maybe you have a student who's assigned as a note taker, or you're recording this, but what you do is you're going to develop a rubric based on those conversations. So when I first started teaching, and for a long time, and even recently, when I work with teachers and I say, let's plan a project, and I say, okay, develop a rubric, they come back to me with this, or something very similar to this. And the problem is that this is not a rubric, this is a compliance checklist.
It's just building that box that we talked about
Right.
earlier tonight.
It is focusing on mostly quantity, but not quality. And it is not giving students a roadmap for improvement or a roadmap to success. So a rubric should be a roadmap to success. The students should be able to look at a rubric and think about their work and be able to know at what level of quality they are falling along a continuum. And so this is a very generic rubric. When I work with teachers, I start with this as a skeleton.
And if you think about it, these characters really look at, the first 2 are about domain, then about skill, and then the last 2 are about experience.
So when you're looking at this, it's very vague. And of course, you add more stuff based on the conversation with the students, based on the goals that the students have, you and the students have agreed are the goals for the project. Then this is how you will add things. What do you need to know beyond accuracy? What do you need to know beyond having a complete information? Is the presentation, for example, if you're like, one of the big projects I worked on last year with students was they had to design and code a video game. And together we had agreed upon what were the essential elements of a video game. You had to have play, you had to have score, and you have to have skill development and challenges. And so then the kids had to tell me how I would assess those things, and those things were added to the rubric. And then in the ethics and community, we talked about accessibility. So can a colorblind person play this game? Can a person with hearing disabilities play this game? Can somebody with limited mobility play this game? And so we added domains, we added criteria to the rubric based on our conversations. And then, you have the developing, approaching, meets, and exceeds. And when the students look at their own work, they should be able to determine where they are along this continuum. they can make choices. And I had conversations with students who said, I am really having a hard time in Algebra 1, and I really need to focus on that. So I'm okay if I only get a B in this class because I don't have the time to put into it. And I said, okay, you know what you need to do based on the rubric, but if you need more time, just let me know and I'll give you more time. But the students were able to think through what they needed to do to get the highest grade possible. And they knew where to make the effort, but they also knew that because we had this trusting relationship where we had set the goals together, they could come to me and say, I know I'm not at the perfect video game, but I really can't do this because I've got something else going in my life. So it was a very understanding relationship, and it made for a really good classroom environment. It was excellent, especially once the pandemic hit and we had to go remote. So when you're looking at this, of course, what you're teaching in your domain is the most important thing that you want the kids to learn, because that's what you were hired to teach. So when you assign point values, it is perfectly okay to have some things be worth a whole lot more points than others. And you set the priorities and you divide it as much as you need to, and in any way you
Have you
to.
ever had your students also help you set these values? I've done that. And I found it was really actually pretty interesting what they said. This is important and this is less important.
Well,
it was another way of thinking that through. But
I
was teaching in college, so it was
Yeah.
a bit of a different experience.
I always had at least 60% had to be related to whatever topic. So if I was working with a teacher who was teaching introduction to veterinary science, then 60% had to be about veterinary science, specific content knowledge that the kids had to know. Or if it was learning, Spanish or chemistry or whatever it was, I wanted 60% to be domain specific, but everything else, I just wanted it to be important enough to the students that they paid attention and went through the experience and learned from it and learned to think about more than just a test. So once you have a rubric,
That the
something
communities help decide.
that has been developed in agreement with everybody who's participating, it's important to give feedback while the project is in process. I am very much against assigning something and washing your hands of it until kids turn it into you. I think it's very important to guide kids and to listen to kids and to talk to kids. The way I give feedback, there's a name for it. It's called the WISE feedback framework. And what you have to do is you have to remind the students that there are agreed upon expectations, because everything revolves around these expectations. That's what you're aiming for. Then if there are gaps between the project as it is and the expectations, then those gaps need to be explicitly pointed out. And then you have to give actionable suggestions. So if there are gaps, you can't just say, well, you have a gap. Too bad, so sad. You have to say, you have a gap. Let's work together. I think a way to fix it might be, what are your ideas or what are you working on? But there has to be some suggestion for getting to the goal. And it has to be with an offer of support from more expert people, whether it's a teacher or a team member.
Or people outside in the community.
Or experts outside in the community. The other thing is, I always believe that this feedback has to be a conversation. I don't believe in giving kids feedback in writing and just sending them away, or giving it to them over email or whatever. It has to be a conversation, because not everything is visible and obvious. So for example, if the student who came to me and said, I'm doing poorly in Algebra 1, and I need to focus on that right now, if I had just graded the project, I would have missed that. I would have never known. But if I'm pointing to the deficiencies and I'm saying, these are the things you need to do, a student might say, yeah, I'm working on it. I'm just waiting on something else. Or a team of students working together might say, well, you have to wait until it's all completed because the way we're addressing it is, so I can't see everything. So it's important to have a conversation. It's also important to have a conversation because when the kids are telling you what they're doing, when students are telling you, you will sometimes hear those misconceptions, or those big gaps that are not obvious when you just look at the project. And that's the time when you can have a conversation that helps them correct that. So you have to ask questions and you have to listen. And the last thing that you have to do is you have to document. So take notes during these meetings. My suggestion, what I've always done is I have a shared online spreadsheet in which I have columns. And in one column, I put in my observations. Then in the next column, what we have is actionable suggestions that sometimes I might type them in myself, but then in talking to the students, I might revise.
Or they might, I suppose,
or they might come up with something, they might fill it in as well. So it's a shared document because I want the students to be participating in this as well. And then even when I'm not meeting with the students, there should be a place where students can respond asynchronously outside of the conversation. And this is a place where students should be able and encouraged to advocate for their choices. So I might make a suggestion like the kids are making a video and I think the music is horrendous. And I say something about it, but the kids might have a reason for sticking with that music. And it's not obvious to me yet, but they might say, we believe in this piece of music and we're going to keep it in there. So students should have agency, and you help them have agency by letting them have the experience of advocating for their choices and their decisions.
I think we've all had this experience where we're working with a colleague and we say, hey, will you take a look at this? And the colleague says, here's what you need to fix. And some of that stuff you're like, oh, absolutely, I need to do that. And some of it you think, no, I really think this is the way it should be. And I think your idea is kind of wrong. And sometimes you are right about their idea being wrong. And sometimes you are wrong about their idea being wrong. But being able to advocate for yourself and say, yeah, I'm going to do this one, but I'm not going to do that one is part of developing that kind of richer understanding of whatever discipline or domain students are learning about. And it's the key, the critical part, again, to those collisions. I think this is a great idea. Oh, it was not a great idea. Okay, well, now there's an opportunity for learning and growth, as we talked about 2 weeks ago.
So, as I said, I believe that feedback needs to be constant while the project is in progress.
And I should specify here, we're really talking about the make phase here. So if we think about our follow, tinker, make, share structure, there's nothing really to assess at follow. I may need to help people get to that level of the platform, but there's nothing really to assess there. And at tinkering, there's nothing really to assess or give feedback about there either. It's just a chance for people to talk.
But in tinkering, the students might be gaining understanding that will help them then participate in the goal setting conversation.
Absolutely.
For assessing the final project.
And so it's usually a really helpful thing for learners to have already gone through a tinker phase before they start setting those goals or setting the expectations for the community. I think we should do it like this. I think we need this characteristic is not something you can do before you understand what the characteristics should be. So tinkering is the chance to do that. When you get to make, now we're really talking about this more robust experience.
So I like to break my projects into phases, and I like to have feedback conversations at least once during each phase of a project. So the planning, that's when you're gathering your resources, and these are just some of the things that might happen during the planning phase of a project. And you give feedback, which might send kids back to do additional research or to revise their sketches or whatever it is they're working on. But when they do that, they have confidence that they can move on to the execution with a higher chance of success than if they just go from planning to execution without having had anybody take a look and give them some feedback.
And people can head the wrong direction, right? They can be misguided. So giving people feedback at that first planning phase is a great way to solve problems before they happen later.
Right. And it's one of those things where people who say, oh, I tried project-based learning and it was a gigantic waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is it was a gigantic waste of time because they did the assign and hands off until they turned it in and you grade it. And between the assigning and the grading, everything just went off the rails. So giving feedback at every step of the way, again, whenever kids are making things, you can give them feedback. And again, they can either go back and revise or continue, and then they're going to get ready for presenting the product to everybody. And even after the product is finished, I know lots of people say projects are never finished, because you can always improve. Nothing is ever perfect, and there's always space for improvement. So there should always be time after the project is presented to not just the teacher during a feedback session, but to the community at large. Kids should have the opportunity to incorporate the feedback that they get from their peers into their project. And if not, they should at least have time to reflect and self-evaluate. And this self-evaluation and this reflection, this is where the documentation from the feedback sessions is so important, because the students can trace the progress of the project through the feedback that they've received as they've worked on the project.
And again, if we're thinking about the process here as what's really important, not just this crystalline artifact at the end, but the whole process, then looking back over from the end of this project, I can see places where maybe I went the wrong direction, or places where, I really got it there, and that's where my thinking changed and I really started doing things. So having this ability to view back over gives you another opportunity to reinforce the learning.
So this is just the way I like to do things, and I suggest it to teachers when I work on planning projects. I have a rotating schedule of meeting with teams of students if students are working in teams, or with individual students if they're working individually, but I'm constantly meeting, and I go through all the kids. So I meet with all the kids and go back to the beginning, and meet with all the kids and go back to the beginning. And however long it takes, it might be just a 2-minute meeting, it might be a 5-minute meeting, but for as long as I'm with the student, I'm giving them feedback, I'm listening to what they're having to say, and I'm answering their questions and helping them in the moment. And we're keeping track of everything in that one asynchronous document where I'm making suggestions to the feedback I've given, and then they're coming back and giving me their take on things.
Now, this looks like a whole bunch of work.
It is.
But
Well,
the crazy thing is, you know, I avoided this for a long time because I was like, I don't have time for all this. But because the community becomes, in many ways, self-generating or self-supporting, because it's a community of practice, then what I spent less time doing was I spent less time sort of having to prepare lectures and communicating, do all this stuff, so that I could spend my time working with the learners. And I found that I actually had much more time, and it was much more enjoyable time for me too.
right. Rather than having to grade stuff by myself and give it to the kids, I was doing this formative assessment as we were working. So I didn't have to do things outside of the classroom. I did it in the classroom with the students. And I always told the students, if you have a question, because I knew that the projects that we had planned were not something that they could just copy paste the answer. I said, you can go and find answers anywhere you want. As long as when I talk to you, you know what you're doing. And you can say, for example, when we were working in coding, if I said, so why did you use this block and not something else? If they just gave me a look, I would say, you have to be able to explain this to me, or it looks like you got it from somewhere else. So I would tell them, you can use whatever resource you want. If you need to look up a YouTube tutorial, look at YouTube tutorial. If you want to contact an expert and ask, go ahead. But whatever you bring into the project, you can ask a friend, you can ask anybody. Whatever you bring into the project, you have to be able to explain it, and you have to be able to justify using it. So this is how I started planning all my projects, and having this rotating feedback schedule, and giving the feedback in a way that always reminded kids, this is what you said you would do. This is what we agreed was the high quality standard that we would accept as a class. So let's find a way to get you to that. And if you did that at every step of the project, you ended up with really high quality projects, and with kids who were proud of what they had done and trusted the process and were willing to do the hard work, because it wasn't that, you know, oh, my teacher hates me and so she's going to give me an F anyways, or whatever it is. The transparency made the kids want to do the work, and they felt supported, and they felt the support of the community as well.
So if we think about the kind of in kind of sum here as we finish up, as we think about the 5 characteristics of successful project-based learning, we need a framework for what those, how to integrate those projects into the learning. We need a foundation of goals for integrating that. And then we need a foundation of assessment. And with all of those pieces together, we get some really rich learning. And that learning has to focus on openness, that, again, this idea of low floors, wide walls, high ceilings, so learners can explore, develop, test, iterate, and understand from a shared starting point from that same platform, so that, again, they can all talk to one another. Relevance to specific learning goals. The project should illustrate those goals. So it's not just, well, I know students are supposed to do this kind of project, so I'll have them do this kind of project. That you have thought through the goals, your goals in those 3 spheres, thinking about the domain, thinking about the experiences, thinking about the skills, and then bringing the project so that it grows up out of that. A challenge that collides learners. So we want to make sure that learners can't just kind of skate through this, because we really want them to confront the misunderstandings that they have. But at the same time, attainability. The project has to be something that people can actually do in the time frame. It has to have not so much complexity that the project is not achievable. So, and not so much stuff that the feedback gets lost. It's such a huge project and there's so much stuff, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. So we want to think about discrete, small, attainable projects. And finally, transferability. That there's an opportunity here in this project in the classroom that's going to prepare you for going outside of the classroom, for going to different contexts, so that you have a sufficient embodiment of skill and knowledge that learners can carry what they have learned into new situations and projects. So again, this 4-step structure combined with working together to develop goals and working together to assess gives us something really groovy. And now we're up for questions.
I guess we were so good, nobody has questions.
You were very good. People always have questions about me, like, what in the world is that guy talking about? But feel free to unmute and ask questions, and or you can type them in the chat. You can go get breakfast, lunch, a late night snack. Who knows? You could be lots of different places. I keep looking over here, but we should be looking over there.
Yeah, but I'm looking at the chat because the chat is in your one.
I know, but let's stop sharing.
Okay.
Here, and then just be us. Is anyone, that was just a lot of stuff. And once again, we will put up the video of this and the PDF of the slides so that you can get to those later. And let's see, earlier in the, somewhere in the chat, Christine posted the links so you can get to it at past webinars, and it looks like that should be a place to get stuff. All right, Jeremy, do you want to talk about that, or are you just, I mean, is there any way that you're thinking about letting them percolate?
Yeah, I'll jump in for a minute. So we're halfway through a unit right now, and it seems a little bit late to jump in on this, but for next semester, like what I'm doing right now, like, okay, so we're doing poetry, right? And it's not the most exciting unit.
Oh, come on.
Poetry is so exciting.
Right? And I'm trying to scaffold it a little bit now. For example, we're talking about in-out experiences when we felt like we were as part of an in-group versus part of an out-group. And with a lot of international students, they've had this happen a number of times. And then we're trying to focus that into some type of narrative poem. And so to scaffold this, I gave, my experiences, moving abroad and so on and so forth, and being part of the in and out groups. And then they're watching me do this. Okay, guys, so here's my story. Now I have to put some rhyming couplets in there, and okay, well, let's see how this works and see how the meter is. And so it's become a bit of a group conversation. So I'm not quite up at the project base of it, but I am getting, the community feedback with the students, and they've written out their personal experiences, and they're just starting to kind of jump into this kind of this group effort making, group effort project. So I'm trying to take what you guys have been talking about and say, okay, how can I apply this in something odd like poetry?
What's interesting about this is the idea of, especially that follow project, that platform project. So, there are a lot of existing poems about this, this common human experience of being an outsider, being in the out group, and they take a lot of different forms. So one of the fun places to start with a platform project is to take an existing poem and then have people start tinkering with it. So how would you change this to be about leave most of the structure and the rhyme scheme and the meter the same, but if you start shifting a few things, how does that make the poem feel? And it is a project thinking about ways that you can adapt an existing poem to be more personal. And you think about this happened mostly with painters, but a lot of writers did this too, where you would write in the style of, as a way of thinking through what they were accomplishing. So I can remember as an English student, we would try to write things briefly, like Hemingway with no adjectives. And then we would try to write things ornately, like maybe Dickens, and with so doing that actually is then a way of thinking through stuff, so that then I can begin to build my own poem. And maybe my poem has meter but no rhyme. Maybe my poem has rhyme but no meter. Maybe my poem is completely free verse. Maybe my poem is a limerick. Right? I mean, and each of those carries different weight with it. So it's a great way to think through. And in every case, part of what you can then talk about is what is the experience of this for you as a hearer of the poem? What is the experience for you as a creator of a poem? What skills were necessary to come to that? And what did that teach you about the domain of poetry? And I think that it's a great example. It'd be a really fun thing to do.
I read something fascinating about poetry today that might have nothing to do with this, but it was Henry Jenkins and James Paul G talking about poetry, and how James Paul G wrote a book of poetry while he was having terrible allergic reactions, and his reflex in the middle of his horrible misery of having allergies and not being able to breathe was to write poetry. But then he said that the poems made more sense when he read them out loud, because he knew what he had been feeling when he wrote the poems. And they compared it to Amanda Gorman when she read her poem at Biden's inauguration, and how her hand gestures and her facial expressions and her voice were part of the poem that when you read it on a page,
you don't see the performative aspect.
You've missed a big part of what the poem is. So maybe bringing in a public performance of the poem might be part of the project, where, because this is a lived experience that the kids are feeling, they're going to read it differently if it's their own experience than if it's somebody reading about their experience.
Yeah, there will be a lot of ways to tinker too. Like, obviously poetry is about images and about, these kind of sharp crystals of words. But what would happen if you translated that poem into images? Can you find images that would demonstrate that? That might appeal to some people and give them a way to tinker and to bring in expertise to the community. What does that poem sound like in music? If you could find, pieces of music that would illustrate that, what would that poem be like in one language versus another? Obviously, many of you are teaching in multilingual schools, so there are things that you just can't say in one language that are so powerful in another language. And so thinking about those tensions and difficulties, and each of those would be a way of building on a platform and developing that diverse community of tinkerers that then lets you have an even richer community of makers.
You know, that's some excellent advice. So I can, right now, I can maybe pause what we're doing and say, okay, guys, we're going to look at these poems and we're just going to tinker with them. We're just going to, you know what, take out these words, or like, you know, make it fit some other situation or whatnot. To give them that scaffolding of tinkering, and then they can move into kind of their end project that we're working on now. So yeah, thank you very much. That's excellent advice.
It's a fun way, you know, like, so just thinking about the code, changing those numbers lets you see exactly what each part of that code is doing and lets you begin understanding it. And so taking out, you know, all of the verbs, or taking out all of the nouns, or taking out, you know, this particular kind of phrase, you start to see how you understand the nuts and bolts of how the poem is put together. Anyone else? Other stuff?
I guess you guys are that good.
I usually get a lot of questions about the rubrics and the schedules.
Yeah.
I do like your rubrics. I took some screenshots, so like I'll definitely be modifying my own. I don't have enough feedback, you know, feedback loops for the students, and that's something that I've, you know, been trying to work on, but I didn't have a good template for it. And I'm actually going to use that. It's all right.
To me, the part that was really, so I had never really thought this through before, but I love the idea that you brought in of having the learners be able to justify and defend and like their choices, because that's also part of, you know, you want them to be critical about their own process, but
I don't want them to cave.
That's right, because
I don't want them
just
to say,
caving
well,
to what the teacher says.
You're the teacher and that's what you said and that's it. Then they're not developing their own
voice.
Voice. They have to be people, and they can't be people if they're always caving in to authority rather than having a conversation with a more expert person. So, yeah. And it's important for them to learn, like, not all students, not all learners have an adult to have this conversation with, and having these conversations with an adult helps them. Like, I've met kids who don't know how to talk to an adult because they are they're always in a hierarchical place where the adults speak and the students listen, and they do whatever the adults say, but they never get to push back and justify what they're doing or defend what they're doing.
Yeah. And, you know, to me too, the idea that if the student just copies what I tell them to do, I can't really know anything except how well they follow directions. And if they just cave to everything I say,
you don't know what they're thinking.
I still don't know.
You don't know what they're understanding or what they're not understanding. If they just say, oh yeah, that's a good suggestion, and they do everything you say, then you're guiding the project. You're putting your imprint on the project rather than bringing out what the students can do. And especially if you're working, exactly, it's less authentic. And if you're working in, for example, you guys are working in schools with kids from everywhere, their projects should reflect who they are as people, not just as students, but what are their preferences? What are their cultural traditions that they find important enough to put in their work? Or do they want to be when they're older? You know, like, especially with these poems, like, it would be such a great opportunity to talk about, you know, they were outsiders, and what will they do when they see an outsider to help that outsider not have a bad experience, like turn it around.
Or have a really bad experience, like really just drive the outsider, destroy.
Thank you.
I don't know, that might be what people want to do.
Well, that's a great example of taking it a step further. Like, all right, we've created this stuff, and you've explained your emotions and through poetry. Now, like, how can we scaffold it for someone else we see, you know, in the situation? Or how can we plan a very, you know, naughty situation to make them feel worse? Stretch goals. Yeah, stretch goals.
That's exactly right.
Are there other questions that people would like to ask? I enjoy so much when it's like getting together in the same room somehow. You have a very I don't know what the right word is, very warm approach to presentations.
Well,
Both times.
It's because we're in this
mean,
void, this white void.
both times that I've seen you present, though, I've walked away feeling like I've really learned. I've absorbed a lot of information, and I have to think more about it. And I wish that our sessions were longer, had a different. We didn't have this crunch from the beginning to the end to kind of try to finish, because there's so many ways. There's so many ways and different levels of school that are sitting here listening to you. That how do we apply this? How does some of this work in grade 2? You know, and what can you do with these things? And just want to let people know that you know, the conference that we're going to be having in March in Bangkok, which is sort of the combined teachers conference and leadership. It'll be in Bangkok, and we are certainly hoping that Bill will be there. We're going to talk about how we're going to structure their presentations, but we'd love to have more from you. And I want to thank you both so much for giving us your time and for sharing so much in such a condensed time frame.
Well, it's been really fun, and obviously this is stuff we think about a lot and talk about a lot and teach each other about a lot. And
since Jeremy is talking about the cats, if you go to my website, bleiderman.com, I have some scratch projects that walk you through some of the stuff, and I'm actually going to write one about the cat, this particular one, for creating interactive art with cats.
yeah, Key is also playing with cats, so there are several people playing with
cats. It's so
much
fun.
But anyhow, thank you all for attending, and for all of the teachers who are sitting here tonight. You know, just let me express our just deep gratitude for what you've done to get our schools through this year, and for what you've done for the kids in these schools. What a year it's been. Next year will hopefully be better. It won't be perfect. It'll be better, but it's something that you have done, just an amazing thing. And the gratitude that we all feel for what's happening in our classrooms is almost can't express it. But thank you. And I hope your summer begins soon and you get to really get a break. But beyond that, please stay in touch, and Bill and Bea will get back in touch more.
and we're happy to chat to anyone. Just let us know. I think on Twitter, I'm at Rankin W, and she's at B Leiderman. And so we'd be glad to chat.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for giving your time today. Have a good rest of the weekend.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.